Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. I hope you've made it through the week successfully. I hope you've had a good week. I hope you achieved everything you wanted to. And now it's time to kick back a little bit and just relax. I think maybe we could all use a little bit of a vacation. It's time to go somewhere quiet and peaceful. Somewhere a little spooky, so that we can clear our heads and get a little time to ourselves. That's what today's stories are all about. A little spooky trip to find out where it is that we clear our heads and collect our thoughts. And I think I've got some pretty good stories to get you in the mood for just that. Our first story is about a strange community off in the trees, a place you could maybe see yourself for years and years to come, whether you want to be or not. So, let's take a trip to Serene Meadows. I've been looking at those lights every day since I took the job. I work overnight at one of those big warehouses. It's not an Amazon warehouse, but it's similar. They do a lot of off-brand furniture and things, and me and a couple of other guys work overnight loading trucks. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me fed and my bills paid. It's a 10 to 6 kind of gig. You bring your lunch and eat during one of your smoke breaks, but as long as the trucks are loaded by morning, the bosses don't really care. All that preamble was to tell you that the lights are something I've wondered about since the first night I came to the warehouse. It wasn't much, just a little string of lights in the woods beyond the road, but it took my attention off the playlist I was listening to. It was beyond some trees, maybe 100 feet into the woods, but I wondered what could be back there. Was it someone's workshop? Was it some housing development? Weirder still, maybe it was a government facility or some kind of haunted wooded area. I thought about it all shift and caught myself looking at the woods on the way home, though I couldn't see the lights in the daytime, of course. I dreamed about them that night. I didn't know what the lights were, but I dreamed they were twinkling in the woods as I sat beside the roadside. It reminded me of the lights on my light bright from when I was a kid. Sometimes I would set up the paper and just fill it with the white bulbs and pretend it was a field of fireflies, the ones that came in the spring and summer. I would sit on the back porch for hours when I was a kid and watch them until my mom made me come inside. That's what they looked like to me. And the longer I looked, the more they danced. That night, as I drove past the lights again, I resolved to ask somebody about it. "What do you guys know about those lights in the woods?" I asked, the three of us sorting and loading boxes into tonight's truck. Andre and Kevin looked at each other, pausing for a moment in our nightly drudgery. "The lights along 45 East?" Kevin asked, clearly hoping I was talking about something else. "Yeah," I said. "Why, are there more lights?" Andre laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, that ain't nothing. It's just some lights out in the woods. Nothing to worry about." We loaded a little more cheap furniture as I chewed it over, but I still found myself curious about those lights. "But what is it?" I asked again, and the two of them sighed. "It's nothing," Kevin said. "Don't worry about it," Andre said, but they clearly knew more than they were saying. "What's the big deal?" I asked. Why don't you just tell me?" "Because it's nothing," Kevin said, wincing as he dropped the box he was carrying. "And you shouldn't be looking for nothing," Andre added, his face looking like maybe he had said too much. I didn't bring it up again after that, but it was never far from my mind. For 3 weeks, I watched those lights, and then I dreamed about them every morning as I slept like the dead. Then, one night, as I drove past the lights, I couldn't hold my curiosity anymore. I'd driven by an access road that I believed would take me to the lights for nearly a month, and that night, the call was just too great. There was no guard post, no fence, no barbed wire, no nothing, and I figured it couldn't be dangerous if they weren't trying to protect it.
So instead of driving to work, I turned down the access road and drove into the woods. Stupid, I know, but I had to know. If it really was a forest full of fireflies or just some redneck solar lights, I suddenly had to know. When I drove under a sign that sat high above the road, I had to back up and read it. Serene Meadows, read the sign. A charming community. I was standing in the road, trying to read it in the headlights of my car, when my phone rang. It was Andre, and I killed the engine and sat in the car as I picked it up. He wanted to know where I was and why I wasn't here to unload boxes, and without much thought, I put on my best hoarse, sore throat voice that I could manage. I had only planned to have a quick look, but now I needed to know more. Shit, sorry, Andre. I just woke up. I've got some kind of crud, man. It's laid me out today. I just need a day, man. I want to shake this off so I don't bring it to work. He was quiet for a moment, and I got the feeling he was listening to something. You sure you're at home? I blinked at the phone. Andre had never been suspicious of anything and didn't even really want to know why we were loading trucks in a warehouse in the middle of the woods. But he sounded different today. It sounded like he was trying to catch me in a lie, and it almost made me want to come clean with him. Almost, but not quite. Of course I am, I said, cobbling up a cough. I just want to go back to bed, man. I feel terrible. Okay, well, feel better. See you tomorrow night. Yeah, of course, I told him. When I hung up, I actually sighed in relief. It felt like I had dodged something big, or like I hadn't been caught doing something I shouldn't be doing. I could see the lights getting bigger as I drove up the cracked and unmaintained road. No more than 10 minutes later, I pulled up into a very normal-looking cul-de-sac. Each house, and there were 7, was a different color. There was a blue one, a yellow one, a purple one, a red one, a white one, a green one, and a black one. And in front of each house was a blazing streetlight. Each house was a 2-story, with a large front and backyard, and a picket fence around the front of each. They were well maintained, the concrete of the road, too, and it was strange to see something like this in the middle of the woods. This was what I'd been seeing all this time. A perfect little community, not that far from the road. As I parked and walked around the neighborhood, I expected to be stopped by somebody. The lights were on in the houses, and I figured someone would come to see what I was doing here. There were no cars in the driveways, though. Not even so much as an ATV in the shed. And when I peeked in the windows of the yellow house, I saw it was as empty as can be. All of them appeared that way. The lights were on, but no one was home. It was the strangest thing, just an abandoned subdivision left in the woods. But the longer I stayed, the less alone I started to feel. There was something about the encroaching woods around the houses, the way the trees leaned in, the way the shadows moved in the underbrush. I never felt in danger, but I did feel watched. It was like seeing shadows move for just a fraction of a second, and then slink away before I could get a good look. I finally got up the courage to try the door on one of the houses, after knocking for about 10 minutes straight, but it was locked. All of them were, it seemed, except the black house. I didn't really want to go into the black house. It seemed ominous somehow, but it did, and it was just like the rest of them. TV sitting off as it sat before the couch, kitchen in order, except the fridge was empty, and a dining room set for a meal. The upstairs had 2 small bedrooms and a large master bedroom with a bathroom. The bathrooms, one downstairs and 2 upstairs, were fully furnished, and the beds were made and ready for new owners. The whole place was a little freaky, but I kind of felt like the house had been waiting for me somehow. I know how that sounds, but I felt like I was supposed to be here, you know? And when I came back downstairs, I checked my watch and realized that I'd been exploring for 4 hours. It was pushing 10:30, and I supposed I should bail. There's probably some lazy security guard that would be by around midnight to catch me here. But as I drove out of the cul-de-sac, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. It was like leaving home, and I desperately wanted to turn around and go back. I had inadvertently given myself a 3-day weekend with my call-out, and when I got home, I stayed up playing games a little bit before heading to bed. I dreamed about the little community that night, just as I had dreamed about the lights before that. But this time, the dreams were different. I was standing in the master bedroom of the black house, looking down at the street as the streetlights burned brightly. As if on cue, the doors to the other houses banged open, and a parade of shadowy people came spilling out. They exited the houses in long columns, and as they approached the middle of the cul-de-sac, they congregated there, filling the street. The streetlights brightened, their almost eye-watering light becoming even brighter. There was a crackle of electricity, and all the shadow people were suddenly gone. I woke up then, gasping for breath, and wondered what the hell that had been. I went back to Serene Meadows that day, dreams be damned, and by daylight the place seemed very different. The cul-de-sac was pitted and cracked, the road nearly gone from the grass. The houses were still there, but they were peeling, and the windows were mostly broken or dusty. The doors were splintered, and most of them had been kicked in, but it was the street lights that seemed the saddest. The glass was broken, the lights shattered or missing, and the whole place looked like the woods would reclaim them at any time. I was perplexed. It was like a tornado had been through here, and a search of the houses found nothing but gutted rooms and graffiti everywhere. It looked like homeless people might have discovered the place way before I did, and I was glad I had worn boots. There were needles and cans scattered around, as well as a few blanket mounds and sleeping bags, but I didn't find anyone there. Whoever had been living there was long gone. I didn't know what had happened to the place. It had been fully intact the night before, and as the sun set, I got in my car and headed home. Looked like the kind of place I definitely didn't want to be after dark. The sun was dropping as I got back on the road, careful not to be seen by Andre or Kevin if they were heading to work. But as night settled over the woods, I saw the lights again and stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. I stared, not caring if anybody came along to beep at me. I'd seen the place. There couldn't be any lights coming from there. The houses looked gutted, the copper wire probably the first thing to go, and the streetlights were broken and shattered. Still, something made me turn around in the road and drive back to see who the lights belonged to. What I found was the same little community that I'd seen the night before. 7 perfect houses around a cul-de-sac, the streetlights burning bright and the road well maintained. As I sat there marveling at them, though, that was when I saw the first of the figures. With the lights on, they were hard to miss, perfect shadow people, looking down on me from the windows of the upper floors. There were just a few of them at first, but the longer I watched, the more they piled up. Some houses only had a few, but others had dozens. As they began to fill the bottom windows too, I put my car in reverse and got out of there. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't want to be seen by those things or find out what they would do to me. I drove like a bat out of hell, and when I got home, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I went to bed in my room, but the dreams seemed to be waiting for me. This time I was standing in the road. The lights were flaring, and the doors opened as they came spilling out. I was suddenly surrounded by a sea of shadow people. They were whispering something, whispering my name, and as they gathered around me, I saw the streetlights flare. I woke up to find I wasn't in my room anymore. I was on the bare wooden floor, the sunlight spilling through the broken windows of the black house. I was in the master bedroom of the black house, and by the daylight, it looked rougher than even I remembered it. I didn't know how I'd gotten there, but I knew an Uber wasn't going to come get me this far out. I'd have to walk the 7 or 8 miles back to town. If I wanted to get there before lunchtime, then I better get going. The way up the access road felt like it took years, and as I made my way to the highway, I sighed and started hoofing it. When a car pulled over to the shoulder, I wasn't surprised to discover that Andre was behind the wheel. "Looks like you're feeling better," he said, reaching over to pop the passenger side door open. "Climb in, bud. Let's talk." As we drove, Andre asked me if I had been to Serene Meadows. I couldn't lie, not as I was walking up the side of the road, so I told him that I had been. He nodded, said that he'd been afraid of that, and pulled into the parking lot of this little diner off the interstate exit. We got a booth, ordered food, and he told me what he hadn't wanted to tell me back in the truck when we were loading boxes for the day. "I've been there too," Andre said, sipping coffee. "Everyone who sees the lights has to go have a look. I saw it, but I'm guessing you've seen more than I have. I saw this pristine little development in the woods and turned back around as quickly as I could. I didn't want to get shot. This is the South, and a fella of my ethnicity who's skulking around after dark is likely to get a bullet in the head and a how do you do later. B," he paused, sipping more coffee, "I saw the shadow people, and that sealed it for me. It was just a glance, nothing more, but that was enough for me. I've been loading trucks out there for about 5 years. Did you know that? It's decent work, and the pay's pretty good. In that time, I've seen people come and go, and usually it has something to do with those lights. Some of them just stop showing up. Some of them go crazy thinking about it. But it's like a drug when you get right down to it. You stop it for good, you stop giving it your attention, and eventually you kick it. That's how it was for Kevin, and that's how it'll be for you, too." I choked on my coffee. "Kevin seen this, too?" Andre nodded. "Yep. He and I had a similar talk. Saw him walking up the roadside one morning after calling out from work. Asked him if he'd been to Serene Meadows, and he told me he'd been exploring, just like you." Did he wake up there after the dreams?" I asked. And Andre nodded again. "He didn't know how, but he woke up in one of those houses. Said he had dreamed about the shadow people. The house, as I think you know, only appears at night. By day, they just look like trash houses, but at night, it's the best little community in the woods. They look comfy at night, but I'll warn you flatly not to spend time there. I've known more than a few people who gave in to its call and simply disappeared altogether. One of them, a guy named Russell, told me he was living in the yellow house, the very same one Kevin woke up in." I looked at him shocked. "He was living there? It's a squatter's shack. Why would he do that?" Andre shrugged. He said that if he was going to keep waking up there, then he might as well start staying there. He was tired of the walk of shame afterward, and Andre shook his head, trying to find the best way to tell it. He said that the longer he stayed there, the more it resembled the house he saw by night. He said he saw the midnight procession as the shadow people went to the bright lights, and he said he heard them whisper to him as well. "What were they whispering?" I asked. Not really wanting to know, but needing to know. "They were whispering for him," Andre said, "and then one night, he just never showed up for work. I knew where he was, but I didn't go looking for him. He was gone, just like you'll be gone if you let that place eat you up. Do yourself a favor and leave it alone. Drink yourself to sleep tonight. Take a sleeping pill if you don't like to drink, but try not to think about that place. If you wake up there, just leave as fast as you can and call me. I'll come get you. If not me, Kevin will. If you can't do that, just come stay at my place for a few nights. I'll watch over you, like I did for Kevin, and we'll get you through this. You seem like a nice kid, but if you persist with this, then it will eat you up. Believe it. I agreed to crash at Andre's for a few nights, but I can't stop wondering where I'll wake up tomorrow morning. Even though it scares me, I can't stop thinking about that little community in the woods. What happened there to make it like this? What darkness lurks through there that makes even the homeless and the desperate leave it be? Most of all, I wonder if those shadow people are the people who tried to stay and were never seen again. As curious as I am, I hope I never find out. Knowing might be a great way to join that congregation one fateful night.
Sometimes you truly find your peace in the strangest of places. Coming up next, we have a story about a favorite park. A park where the storyteller discovers someone a little outside the ordinary. A little dangerous, perhaps. So let's hear about the night I met Soap Sally.
The storm was one of epic proportions. It closed the schools for 3 weeks, right up until Christmas break. 4 days before Christmas, that was when I met her. Better not stay out too late or Soap Sally will get ya. Mom called this after me, right as I went out the door to go play with Rob and Tera. I rolled my eyes, slipping on my mittens as I grabbed my sled from behind the door. Sure, Mom, I'll be sure to watch out for Soap Sally. That was always what my mom told me. Her little attempt to scare me when I was a kid, I think. When I was younger, 4 or 5 maybe, Mom would use it to make sure I was inside before the street lights came on. I remember the first time she ever said it to me, the moment ingrained in my brain forever. I was heading out to play in the sandbox in the front yard, something Dad had spent all day building on his day off, and she had offhandedly told me to make sure I was in before the street lights came on, or Soap Sally would take me away. I had stopped, little pail and shovel in my hand, and asked her who Soap Sally was. My mother just shrugged and said it was something her mother had always said, and the two of us had used it as our kind of personal joke from then on. Better get the groceries in before dark, Mom would say. Soap Sally might get you. Better hurry up and take the trash out, Mom would say. I think I hear Soap Sally prowling around. We'd done it for so long, it was just kind of normal. But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 12, and I knew Soap Sally was just a boogeyman that adults used to scare kids. She was no more real than the Wampus Cat, another of my mother's colorful stories, and I put it out of my mind as I ran to join the others. Terrell had told us that his brother had told him about a big hill near Basker's Pond. It's so steep that when you come down it, you almost fly, he said. So I trudged through the fresh powder, over the streets that no longer looked like streets at all, and made my way towards the edge of town. My hometown isn't very big, one of those 2 stoplights and a gas station kind of places you always drive through on your way somewhere else. There were maybe 20 kids my age in town, and our whole school could have probably fit in your graduating class. We knew we were living in a podunk town in the Georgia hills, and most of us dreamed about getting out after high school and doing anything but staying here. For some of us, that dream was actually realized. For others, the cemetery was all we had to look forward to. I met Terrell near Basker's Field, a small little picnic area that butted up against Basker's Pond. The pond wasn't huge, but it was a great place to swim and fish in the summertime, and just, kind of enjoy yourself. Today, however, it was a winter wonderland of fresh snow and chilling wind. Tera was bundled up to the eyebrows in a thick ski jacket, and his snow pants had little rolls in them that made him look a little like the Michelin Man. He, too, was clutching a battered old sled, and when he spoke, I could see the air puffing from his mouth, even under his hood. "'Bout time. Where's Rob?" That was when we heard a loud yell from up the road, and Rob came running with a banana-yellow disc under his arm. He was wearing a matching ski suit and a pair of thick snow boots that seemed to be the only thing he wore that wasn't yellow. His voice cut through the sound of the wind like a foghorn, and I wondered if we were the only people in town not inside right now. It was a little spooky, even in the middle of the day. "Took you long enough," Terrell said. "Are you ready to sled?" "If this hill is half as cool as you say it is, T, then I'm ready to sled till midnight," Rob said excitedly. With that, we set off. We had all seen the hill in question. Overlook Crest was the place to spread your blanket on the 4th of July to watch the fireworks, or to picnic on, or to just sit and watch the boats as they went out there fishing during the warm months. It offered a great view of the water, and as we trudged up it, the hill felt twice as steep as usual. The snow made it slippery, and the three of us were laughing and pushing as we reached the top. Terrell won, of course. Terrell was a beefy kid, and he was harder to push down than Rob, who was mostly skin and bones. He set his sled against the snow, and when he slid down, he really did seem to fly. We spent the day on the hill, sledding, snowball fighting, making snowmen, and generally enjoying the day. Blizzards like these were rare, and we'd been having a lot of days like this where we were just free to be kids and enjoy our childhood. Sometimes we linked up with others from school to have snowball fights or play games, but mostly it was just Terrell and Rob, and me, of course, enjoying the childhood we had before it was over. We had all expected it to end when we went to high school, the dying place of childish things, and not one of us could have guessed that it might be something childish that ended our innocence. I didn't notice it was getting dark until the streetlights came on and sent a dazzle of diamonds up from the snow. Ah, crap. Mom's going to be mad if I'm late. "Oh, relax," Rob said. "It's not like we have school tomorrow. As long as you're home before bedtime, why would she care?" Rob's parents were never home, leaving him in the care of his aunts or his grandmother since they worked late. Terrell and I, however, had mothers and fathers who would expect us home when the streetlights came on, and I could see Terrell shuffling nervously too. We were all poised at the top of the hill, preparing to race to the bottom, and when Rob saw our looks, he rolled his eyes and jumped. "Last one to the bottom is a baby," he sing-songed. We all jumped then, putting on a burst of speed as we tried to catch him. As we came down, I began to hear a strange noise, the rumble of something rolling down the street, the jingle of an almost merry bell, and the hum of a gravelly voice. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, and that's when I saw her walk under a streetlight. It was an old woman, pushing a wheelbarrow or a small cart. We were heading right for her, and Rob was turned around backwards so he could laugh and mug at us. "Rob, look out!" He turned just in time to smack face first into the cart. We swerved to a stop, Terrell and I running down the hill the rest of the way. We could already see the old lady bending over him to inspect the prone boy, and under the glare of the streetlights, he looked pretty bad. There was a big gash on his forehead, the blood leaving red streaks down his yellow ski suit. Rob was groaning when we approached, and the woman looked up at us, smiling feebly as she rose to her full height. She was as wide as she was tall, and she was nearly 6 feet. She wore a voluminous black dress, her hair caught in a scarf or a kerchief that trapped it against her head. Her hands were liver-spotted, her fingers long and spidery as they sank back into her sleeves. The cart she was pushing seemed to be empty, and I figured she was on her way to pick something up when we bumped into her. There was a bell attached to it, and Rob flopped back against it, making it tinkle merrily. "Dear me, I didn't see you there, son. Are you okay?" she said in her thin, spidery voice. We helped Rob to his feet, but he was shaky and hardly able to stand. I was worried that maybe he had a concussion, maybe even a broken skull, and I wanted to help him get to the house as quickly as I could. Terrell asked the woman if we could borrow her cart, but she said she needed it later and couldn't loan it out. "But I'll help you get back to my cottage so you can call for help. I'll make you something warm to drink while you call your parents and let them know what happened. Put him in the cart now. You can help me push him back to my house." I was hesitant. Mom was always clear on not taking rides from strangers, and certainly not going to their house. But Rob groaned and wobbled then, which made up my mind. Our town was so small, after all. We may have never seen this lady before, but there was very little chance that she would want to hurt us, right? No one ever wanted to hurt us, and despite all the lessons about stranger danger, we had never even heard of anyone getting kidnapped. We loaded Rob into the wagon, the bell jingling as he slid in, and pushed it back the way we had come. As it turned out, the woman lived in the woods behind Basker's Park. The tires rumbled over the wood chips that led to her house, and Rob groaned as we jostled him in the cart. We had left our sleds behind, and we moved unburdened towards the dark little cabin at the end of the long road. It looked spooky at night, not a candle or a light inside. "You can push him right in the front door," she gravelled out, As we neared, something screamed at me not to go inside that house, though. Common sense seemed to have reasserted itself, and when I paused on the steps to the front porch, the old woman and Terrell barely noticed. As the door came open, I could smell something like wax melting, a warm, aromatic smell of tallow. There were floral smells as well, and something akin to the cooking of bacon fat. There was another smell, though, something that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. A coppery smell. A wet smell. And when I took a step back, the old woman seemed to notice that I hadn't come inside. She turned in the doorway, and we made eye contact for a few seconds, before she asked why I wasn't coming in. I just remembered that I thought of something, anything, and landed on a flimsy lie. My dad, he's coming to pick us up, and if he gets there and we're gone, he'll be worried. I probably need to... I turned to go back down the cedar path, but suddenly her hand was around my wrist. I felt my breath catch as I looked down at those long, spidery fingers. The bones creaked beneath her skin, and the flesh around them was so thin that I imagined I could see them through the pale wrapper. As firm as her grip was, her skin was waxy and slick. It reminded me of nothing so much as candle wax, heated tallow, and when I looked into her face, I could see nothing human there. Her face looked like an exceptionally well-crafted mask, a mask made of human skin. "Come inside," she whispered, and I could see that her mask bore too much makeup. She had really caked it on, and it made her look almost clownish. Whoever had applied it roughly. Her eyes were like black pits beneath all that dark eyeshadow. I whispered, my tongue now dry as it battered against my chapped lips. "I just need to tell my dad where Your father can't help you now," she breathed, grinning with her mouth full of gravestone teeth. "Don't worry. You'll see him very soon." She yanked my arm then, and I saw my one chance to escape. I pulled back hard, nearly toppling her from the porch, my arms slipping out of her greasy grip. I was running flat out as she cawed angrily behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. My mom was waiting for me on the porch, looking angry as I came running up. She asked what I thought I was doing out so late. She asked if I meant to meet Soap Sally, as she always joked about. She asked me if I intended to freeze to death out in the snow. All those questions went unanswered. All her anger disappeared as I wrapped my arms around her and told her that some old lady had taken Terrell and Rob. She called the police, but seemed angry when she hung up. She told me that they must have thought she was someone pulling a prank. They told her that they would get right on that, and the next time Soap Sally came after her to make sure there was less than a foot of snow on the ground. She sent me to bed, but my dreams were full of the old woman and her deep, pitiless eyes. In my dreams, she got me. In my dreams, she cackled as she peeled my skin. I woke up the next day to hear Mom on the phone with Terrell's mom. "He came home in a state last night. Said some lady had Terrell, just like I told you last night. Didn't you find anything? I'll ask him once he gets up. If he comes home, let me know, please." She hung up the phone and came to talk to me. The police came by later that day to question me. I guess they were taking the disappearance of 2 children a little more seriously now. I told them exactly what I had told my mom. Rob had hit his head, and the old lady had offered to help us. We put him in the cart and pushed him to her house. I got spooked and tried to run, but she grabbed me. I got free and ran to the house. I told my mom what had happened, and she called the police, but they didn't believe her. It seemed like they were interested in this house now and asked me to take them there. I gave them directions, but I refused to go anywhere near that place. They came back later and told me that the house appeared to have been abandoned for years and asked me if I was sure. I told them I was, and they said all they had found was a bit of dried blood and a black dress that might fit a horse. They didn't believe me, that much was apparent, but they believed me after the soap arrived. I woke up one morning about a week after Rob and Terrell disappeared and walked downstairs to the smell of breakfast. Mom was making flapjacks and bacon, and the smell turned my stomach a little as the familiar odors assaulted my nose. To this day, the smell of hot fat makes me want to puke, and the smell of it always takes me back to that house and that day. "Sweetie, could you bring the milk in off the front porch?" I looked outside. "Snow's 3 feet deep, Mom. I doubt the milkman ran today."
"Well, I heard someone on the porch a few minutes ago. They left something and didn't knock. See if it's the milk before it freezes, please." Sitting on the mat was a small wicker basket. Sitting on a bed of black cloth were square packages wrapped in wax paper. I felt my breath hitch as I saw the cloth, but tried to shake it off. What didn't remind me of the old woman in the woods these days? I reached down to pick up the package and felt the semi-solid brick of soap as it smooshed a little between my fingers. I unwrapped it, not sure who would leave soap on the doorstep, and that's when I saw the note. It was under the soap, written in a long, spidery hand, and the words sent a shudder through me that the winter chill couldn't top. "See you soon." I felt the soap slip from my numb fingers. When it hit the boards, I looked down and saw something that pushed a scream up my throat. It was a bone. A finger bone. The police told my dad that it was Rob's finger bone, but they found trace evidence of Terrell's bones in the other bar of soap. Both their parents had received similar baskets of soap, and, unfortunately, Rob's grandmother had brought it out of the bathroom when the police came to check. She had been washing her hands with it all day, having no clue that she was washing her hands with her grandson's body. My own grandmother came to visit a few days later. She and Mom had a long talk about something, and I got the feeling that Mom didn't want her to tell me something. As she shuffled to my room, I couldn't help but shudder as I imagined my door opening to reveal a huge woman in a black dress and a shawl leering at me as she smiled with her witch's grin. When Grandma knocked, I told her to come in. She sat down on the bed and seemed to think about what she meant to say. "I grew up in this town, too. You know that. One night my friend Grace and I were late coming home from a church dance. We cut through the park, and as we passed by the sign that said, 'Welcome to Basker's Park,' we saw an old woman who was trying to fix her cart. She asked us to help her get the cart to her house, and we obliged. No sooner had I seen her house, though, than I got a tickling feeling. My mother had told me about Soap Sally, too, and I suddenly realized what the smell was around that cart. It was tallow and lye and blood. I ran as quick as I could, and I never saw my friend again. You got real lucky, kiddo, but don't press your luck by being careless," she said, giving me a little hug as her bones creaked in that way that Soap Sally's had. She left me then, and we never spoke about it again. That was 5 years ago. 5 long winters ago. The snow is back, and the days are short, but I haven't left my house after dark, not since that night I lost my best friends. Though I never saw her again, I know she has seen me. Sometimes I hear the grumble of that cart, the tinkle of the bell, and it sends me running home as surely as it did the night I escaped her. My greatest fear is that she will make good on her threat one day. One day, Soap Sally may leave me on my parents' front porch, their missing son unknowingly come home.
Travels are full of interesting people to meet and interesting local customs to observe. Just make sure you don't become a part of those local customs. You know, not too much. Coming up next, we have a peaceful little place out in the woods, a place to sit and think about what's going on in the world, a place that may be inhabited by something a little creepy. So, let's hear about what's under the trestle bridge.
It was just supposed to be another camping trip, like so many others we had gone on before. The town we live in isn't huge, but it does have a lot of woodland to explore. We live on the edge of what most people call Appalachia, and we've had more than one weird experience out in the woods. Once, as my friends and I walked down a familiar trail, we smelled a strong and unpleasant scent. Brian thought it must be a bear, but I'd smelled bears before. We'd had one winter under our back porch one year, and this was very different than the musty smell he had left come spring. Another time, while we were camping, we saw ghost lights in the woods. They were beautiful, red and blue and yellow and orange, and though Justin was afraid of them,
I felt drawn to go and see them so I could see them better. I knew better, though. Grandma had told me all about the dangers of following the ghost lights, and had assured us all that we wouldn't like where they took us.
The land of fairies is beautiful, but also terrible for mortals to behold. They would make you young for the rest of your days, though that might not be as long as you might think, she always said with an evil grin. We'd heard whistling and strange growls, throaty yells and strange birds, but none of it ever really scared me. The woods had always been a friendly place, a place of adventure, and I always looked forward to my time there. I never felt uneasy when I was within its borders, and as the four of us prepared to go back into the woods for another camping expedition, I was excited. Brian's brother had told us about an old trestle bridge deep in the woods, and we all wanted to see it. It was part of the old railroad, something that hadn't run through the town in a long time. The tracks were still there, the old station too, but the trains had mostly been for passengers, and we had none these days. No one came in, no one left, and we had no industry for the trains to transport. All the wood we harvested went to the sawmill or the paper mill, and there was no need to transport it by rails. The trestle bridge hadn't seen a train cross in 20 years. It spanned a small gorge in the middle of the forest. Brian said his brother had claimed the bridge was where high school kids went to drink beer, and now that we were freshmen, we should go out there too. He said it was a rite of passage, and that we should go see if the right had decided to leave us a gift out there. We didn't know what sort of gift that would be, but we were all curious to see the bridge. So we told our parents that we were going camping one weekend in April and took to the woods. Brian and I were eager, talking about how cool it would be to see the bridge, but Justin and Frank seemed hesitant. Well, that wasn't quite true. Justin was hesitant, as he almost always was, and Frank was kind of ambivalent. We had met Frank last year at the start of 9th grade, and he had made a pretty good addition to our trio. Frank wasn't an avid hiker, but he liked to hang out in the woods and get a little high from time to time, and that was good enough for us. He also brought outstanding camp snacks, so we were more than happy to hit the trail with him. I wasn't certain there was a sleeping bag in that rucksack of his, but I could already hear the crinkle of chips and snack cakes within it. Any idea how far this bridge is? Justin asked, plodding along grumpily. Justin didn't mind hiking, but he wasn't big on aimlessly wandering in the woods. He had packed enough to make up for Frank's lack of gear, and the tent poked over his left shoulder. He was plodding along at the back of the group, and I was sure we'd have to listen to a fair amount of complaints before we got there. My brother says it's about 3 miles into the woods, following the river until we come to the gorge. After that, it should be pretty easy to find. And if your brother's playing a trick on us, if he's just, messing with us, and we walked for 3 hours into the woods for nothing? Brian rolled his eyes. Then we have a fun little adventure to talk about when we go to college, don't we? Justin grumbled about having to walk 3 miles into the woods, but he couldn't have picked a better day for it. The weather was perfect, a slight breeze keeping the early summer heat at bay. The clouds overhead looked a little wet, but they were nowhere close. We'd have a nice camping trip this weekend, a nice little excuse to fish and relax and enjoy ourselves as we explored the old trestle. The woods around the town were full of things like that, and we'd explored old houses that had been retaken by the underbrush or abandoned vehicles that sagged amongst the leaves. When we were in the 7th grade, we even found an old concrete culvert out there that led into an underground cave that looked a little spooky in the light of our flashlights. The farther we walked, however, the less certain I was that the clouds wouldn't be a problem. The deeper into the woods we went, the more the smell of rain surrounded us. Brian smelled it too, and our pace increased as we kept heading deeper in. Maybe it was just a little rain. Maybe it was just a short downpour, and maybe we could get past it before it soaked everything.
When we came to the gorge and I saw the rising skeletal edifice of the trestle, I breathed a sigh of relief. "There she is, boys," Brian said, sounding surprised to have found it at all. "Looks pretty wrecked," Frank said, tossing a stub of cigarette into the gorge. "We aren't actually gonna go up on that thing, are we?" "Well, yeah," Brian said. "That's kind of the only reason we came here, wasn't it?" "You might, but I don't care what kind of surprise is up there," Frank said. "I ain't going." He had plenty of time to rethink his statement. Just because we had found the gully didn't mean we had made it to the trestle. The closer we got, the more I could see that for its age, it really was in amazing shape. It was less skeletal than I had thought, and looked more like a covered metal bridge. The underside of the trestle was a dark cave, the shadows thick and deep, and I really didn't want to explore the underside unless we really had to. Something about it made me uncomfortable, and as we got closer and closer to the base, the whole thing seemed to grow. It was mid-afternoon when we finally made it, and Brian let his pack fall as he set about climbing at once. You don't want to set up camp first?" Justin asked, taking out his tent and tools for making fire. "I just want to see the woods from up there," Brian said, looking at me as if to ask if I was coming. I let my pack slide off too, and we climbed the side of the trestle side by side. We were laughing as the ground got further and further away, the girders lifting us above the trees until we finally crested the top and came to the old tracks of the railroad. I was full of wonder as I looked out over the woods, the trestle spanning the entire gorge before slanting back down to the woods again. From up here, the clouds looked very dark, and I wondered if the tent would be enough to keep us from getting wet. "Check this out," Brian said, dangling his feet over the edge as he looked down into the gorge. Watching him made me slightly dizzy, and I didn't dare join him on the precipice. When he came back up, however, he had a rope with him and nodded me over to help him pull it up. It wasn't really heavy, but we were careful not to let it get stuck on anything. Brian left me to pull so that he could look over the edge and reported that the rope was attached to an old red cooler. As it came up over the edge, I saw that the rope was attached to a handle, and the whole thing was the red of a kid's wagon left out in the sun. The box was ancient, the bystander of 1,000 summer outings, and there was something inside it. Brian opened the lid and smiled as he pulled out a lukewarm six-pack of Natty Ice, a brand I was passing familiar with. Dad, a staunch Budweiser man, had always shook his head and called it piss water when he saw that it was on sale. I figured for a bunch of kids who were barely old enough to buy beer, the price was probably right, though. I assumed that Brian's brother had put it here. He had told us where to find the trestle bridge, after all, and as Brian fished the note out from under them, my suspicion was confirmed. "Brian, this is a place where high schoolers have come to drink and hang out for generations. Our own mom and dad sat on this bridge and drank when they were in high school, and now it's your turn. I spotted you a sixer this time, but you'll have to bring your own next time. If you ever have extra, leave them in this cooler and then tuck the cooler under the trestle bridge. Also, don't go under the bridge. We think there might be a bear under there. Kevin." The thought of a bear so close to our campsite kind of scared me, but Brian brushed it off. "He's probably just messing with us. Want one?" he asked, popping the top as he offered me one. I hesitated. I'd never drank before, but I figured just one couldn't kill me. It was warm and tasted terrible, but it wasn't the worst thing I'd ever had. Brian drank his quick, laughing as he threw the can into the gorge far below. We watched it spiraling down, spilling the last few remaining drops before it clinked weakly at the bottom. As if in answer, there was a distant rumble of thunder, and from our vantage point, we saw the lightning crack in the distance. We were on a big metal structure with lightning coming in quick and rain already pattering lightly around us. "We better go," I said, Brian looking at the lightning as it rumbled again. He nodded, and we decided to run down the tracks rather than try to scale back down. It would mean doubling back, but it wouldn't be a long trip, and the thought of juggling the rest of the beers and trying to climb down sounded nuts. Brian was holding the four of them close as he ran, smiling to himself as he talked about showing them to the guys. Justin's gonna flip, Brian said with an evil laugh. You know, he still won't even be around anyone who smokes because of that dumb dare pledge. He was right, too. Justin was furiously hammering in tent pegs when we arrived, looking up at the sky every time a drop hit him. He stopped when he noticed us come back with cans that clearly weren't soda. Frank must have recognized them because he laughed and commented that they had found a pretty cool surprise. Brian tossed him one, turning to Justin as he offered him one, too. Justin put a hand on his hips, looking like my mom when she was disappointed in me. Hell no, and you shouldn't either. Why would you just drink something you found on a rickety bridge? Brian blew out a long breath and popped another one. Because, Spaz, my brother left them for us. There was a note and everything, so cool your jets. Brian went back to work, mumbling darkly about being reckless and drinking things that could be poisoned or drugged. The tent came up, and not a moment too soon. The rain was really starting to come down, and it looked like there would be no fire tonight. We all headed into the tent, the wind picking up as it shoved the tent and made the ropes and pegs groan. It was big enough to fit all of us comfortably, and as the lamps came out, Brian held up the last 2 beers. Split the last 2? He asked, everyone but Justin agreeing. We poured them into our camp cups, starting to clink them together before Brian turned to Justin. He was pretending to busy himself with something in the corner, but it was pretty clear that he didn't approve of what we were doing. Come on, Justin, it's not going to hurt you. I tell you what, if we see you becoming an alcoholic after one sip, I'll push you into the gorge and save you the embarrassment. Not funny, Justin said, but he had clearly worn him down. After another half-hearted refusal, he finally held out his cup to Justin and grinned as he poured the last of the beer into it. Then he clinked his glass with the rest of us, and we drank, everyone pulling a face which we laughed at. As the storm raged outside and we ate some MREs that we had packed just in case of bad weather, we started on our ghost stories. Brian was just telling us about a man with a hungry ghost in his basement when a big gust of wind hit the tent hard enough to collapse the middle brace and send it crashing down on us. We floundered for a minute, looking for the zipper as we tried to escape, and finally stepping out into the driving rain. It was still afternoon, the sun an angry line amidst the storm clouds, and I turned as I heard someone struggling with the tent. Justin was trying to pull it, the wind threatening to take it from him with every gust. "Come on," he shouted. "Help me get it under the trestle. It should work as a windbreak." I remembered the warning about a bear, but Brian just shouted back that it was either the bear or the rain. "Besides," he said, "if we see one, we'll just run like hell." It was hard to argue with him while the rain was coming down, so we all grabbed a tent post and moved it into the dry cave created by the trestle. Unlike a lot of train trestles I had seen in movies and on TV, this one was enclosed. I'm still not sure why, but it worked out well for us that day. We knocked in the tent pegs and sat in the tent as we watched the rain come down in buckets outside. Our stuff had gotten a little wet, but we hadn't brought anything that couldn't take a little water. As the light gave way to dark, we started breaking out the lanterns and cards, settling in for the night as we listened to the rain. As I lay there watching Justin and Brian play their 4th or 5th game of Magic the Gathering, I started hearing something besides the rain. It was a deep rumbling, like something snoring deep under the metal bridge. I thought again about Brian's brother telling us there might be a bear under there. I didn't really want to get eaten by a bear in my sleep, and if we were going to have to move again, it was better to do it now. I took out my flashlight and started looking into the shadowy depths of the trestle, but there was nothing to be seen. There was some thick-looking mud under here, some of it having made little stalagmites on the ground, but I couldn't see anything sleeping under there. It wouldn't make a very good den, I reflected, as I shone my light around. It was open on both sides, with the gorge coming in about 30 feet from our tent. There was really nowhere for anything to live down here, but as I swung the light from left to right, I could still hear that weird breathing. On a whim, I pointed it up and under the bridge, and that was when I saw it. First I thought it was a bunch of bats clustered together, but when it flinched under the beam of my light, I knew it was just one big thing. It was a huge bat, way bigger than me, with its large leathery wings pulled up tight around it. It was clinging to the bottom of the trestle bridge, and I imagined that it had been a bad spot to hang when the trains were still in order. I spotted a slight movement to its left and found a second one hanging not far from it. In total, there were 4 of them, and when one of them shifted its wings and looked at me with a red, unhappy eye, I turned off the flashlight and zipped up the tent. The guys had some strong words when I started turning off lanterns, but I told them to be quiet and get down. "What?" Frank asked. "Did you see something out there?" "Was it the bear?" Brian asked, keeping his voice low as we hunkered down. "What bear?" Justin asked, but I waved a hand at them, trying to get them to be quiet. "It's not a bear," I hissed, but about that time, there was a weird sound from outside. It sounded like a high-pitched yawn as something came awake, followed by the rustle of wings. The talk in the tent had ceased now, and you could have heard a mouse fart. In the dark of the undercroft, we heard something huge and leathery take flight, rustling the canvas of the tent as it left the darkness. A second took flight a moment later, and I heard water cascade down as it shook the top of the trees. We all lay on our stomachs, panting for breath, as we listened for more. I had seen 4, and only 2 had left so far. When something hit the ground about a foot from our tent, Justin had to slap a hand over his mouth to stop from screaming. The hushed remnant squeaked from between his fingers like a deflating balloon, but if the creature heard it, it never showed any sign. I could see the vague outline of it as it rose to its full height, and as it flapped its wings and took flight, the tent rustled like it had been in the wind. "Is that all of them?" Brian asked, 3 sets of eyes turning my way. I started to tell them that there had been a 4th, but that was when the 4th fell on top of the tent. We were all very lucky, all things considered. It landed right in the middle of the tent, shattering the plastic pole and sending the plastic material falling down around us. The creature's toenails scrambled across it noisily as it tried to find purchase, and when it took off, I was afraid it would simply carry us off with it. Instead, it just ripped a hole in the top as it flew off, and all of us were left reeling as we lay under the canvas. After a few minutes, it was decided that we would take our sleeping bags and our backpacks and leave the tent behind. We spent a miserable night huddled under the biggest tree we could find. We probably looked like fat caterpillars as we hunkered under the roots of that big tree, but we were as dry as could be managed. We all kept looking towards the skies, afraid the giant bat things would come after us, but they never did. We didn't talk, we didn't dare, and when the sun came up, we made our way out of the woods. We arrived at my house cold, scared, and unwilling to talk about what we had seen. My parents probably thought we had run afoul of something like a bear or a cougar, but they had no idea. That was about 2 weeks ago, and we haven't been back in the woods since. Just knowing that those things are in the woods makes us not want to be there after dark. It's a shame because the woods were our spot, our sanctuary, and now it seems tainted. Brian doesn't even leave the house after sunset these days, and Justin looks at the skies when he's walking. Frank says he doesn't really want to talk about it, and I think he's stoned a lot of the time. I dream about it sometimes, the way that big red eye looked at me when I shone my flashlight on it, and I can't help but wonder what something that big eats. I think it will be a good long time before I talk any of them back into the woods, and our camping days may be at an end.
It just goes to show you that you never quite know what might be living out in the woods. Coming up next, we have a story about an abandoned town. Well, maybe not so abandoned. There's still someone living there, after all. Someone who's been there for a long time. Someone who may be the last man there. So let's hear a little story about the last mayor of Eden.
It all began with the closing of the Walmart. The Walmart was not the catalyst for the death of Eden, but it was the final death throes of a dying town. Eden had never been what you would call a bustling city, with a population that topped out at about 75,000 in the mid-'80s. The city had undoubtedly seen its heyday. The coal mine had finally panned out in '95. The calculator factory had likewise played out in 2002. The paper mill had lasted a while longer, shutting its doors in 2016. That had been the end of the major industry in Eden. The town had continued, of course. The downtown had done a fair bit of business with the summer people who came through. People from out of town always wanted to pick up a summer house or move to the outskirts to get away from it all. Despite the small spikes, the industry was going, and a lot of the people left when the paper mill closed down. Those who remained were the sort of people who couldn't have been blown out with dynamite. They were oldsters who had been there since they came back from World War II or Vietnam, dyed-in-the-wool capitalists who continued trying to bring industry to the area, and real estate people hoping to get one more dollar out of the dying town. Even some of those latter had to take a firm look at what they were trying to sell when the one seemingly solid job market finally closed up shop. The people of Eden didn't seem to mind, though. Quite the contrary. They were glad the last corporate giant was gone from the area. They talked longingly about getting back to the good old days, and how this would help the waning business on Main Street to thrive again, without big corporations keeping their boot on the throat of the little man. Greg did not agree. For one, he'd been working at the Walmart since he got back from college in 2009. It had been keeping food on the table and the lights on in the dingy apartment that he'd been renting over Abigail's drugs for the better part of a decade, and that's how he liked it. They got the majority of his paychecks, too, and they might as well have been a company store the way Greg looked at it. Even so, it was convenient to have everything within easy reach. The second thing was harder to quantify, but was something that the philosophy teachers at the hoity-toity college he'd dropped out of would have understood all too well. Corporate giant or not, Walmart did not pull out of a thriving town that they could still make money in, as a rule. Watching the semi-trucks with the Walmart logos on them drive for the outskirts of town was like watching the axe-wielding vehicles drive out of the remains of the forest at the end of the Lorax book his mother had read to him as a kid. They had sucked the land dry like a vampire, and now it was time to get out while the getting was good. "Decided where you're going to go work now?" Patty asked, coming up on Greg's side and startling him. I don't know," Greg said morosely. "Abby's been trying to get me to work at the drugstore since Rachel went to college, but she just doesn't pay enough for me to live and eat." "Well, since she's your landlady, maybe she'll give you a little discount if you work for her." Greg laughed at that. The thought of Abigail Worthy giving her own grandmother so much as a nickel off her rent was a laughable prospect. That old biddy would probably haggle with the undertaker when it came time to put her in the ground, and then lodge a complaint for me on the grave when he put too little dirt on top of her coffin. He and Patty chatted for a little bit, making small talk as they watched the town disperse in the now empty parking lot of the supercenter. As the crowd thinned out, Greg stuck his hands in his pockets and told Patty he'd see her around. He walked away from the Walmart, his car having long ago been sold due to lack of use. When you never left town, what good was a car? He'd come back from college a month before his dad died, and had still been there a year after when his mom had told him that she was going to live in Florida with his aunt. He'd moved into the studio apartment over Abigail's, and sold his car the same year. The little hatchback had been great when he'd been putzing around Burbank, but now that everything was in walking distance, it seemed as useless as tits on a boar. He'd gotten about $5,000 for it, and coasted a little until he got the job at Walmart. He'd been working there for the past 10 years, it seemed, stocking shelves and answering questions for customers. You would think that after a decade, management would have cut him a check for his retirement, but Greg had never really paid in. He always said he was gonna every year when the papers came around, but he just never got around to it. It always seemed that when you lived in Eden, you did things tomorrow instead of today. It seemed that when you lived in Eden, you always thought there would be more time. "Stand up straight, Gregory. I'm not paying you to slouch." Greg sat up and stopped leaning on the glass cabinet that was full of blood testers and diabetes equipment. He'd been working at the drugstore for about 2 months, and he hated every minute of it. To his surprise, Abigail had indeed offered him a discount on rent, but only if he would work for the 14 hours a day that the shop was open. So, from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., closed on Sundays, Greg stood behind the counter and helped old ladies pick out constipation medication or helped old gents find exactly the right size of Depends for their bony asses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid his rent and kept a bit of food on the table. Aside from selling drugstore things, the widow Abigail also sold a little bit of gas station food that was just affordable enough for Greg to avoid malnutrition. He had asked her once about an employee discount, and it was the hardest he had ever seen the old biddy laugh in her life. When the bell rang over the door, Greg looked up and smiled when he saw Patty coming in. Patty had been coming by the drugstore more and more often now that she knew Greg worked there, and she was a nice distraction from the monotony of his job. She had gotten a job down at the Quick Lube on Main Street, and it seemed that her hands were always caked in grease no matter how many times she washed them, her nail beds oily with the sweat of her labor. Abby glowered at the young woman as she came in, but she wasn't about to turn away a customer, even if most of her fare was to come and flirt with their only employee. Greg was not unaware of Patty's flirtation, but she really wasn't his type. Not that Greg had any right to be picky. He liked her all right, she was a good friend, but the thought of laying in bed with her in the way he had lain with some of the girls that he'd gone to college with made his skin crawl. His mother had always said, "Don't take anyone to bed in Eden, 'cause you're likely related to them," and he supposed it was something that had always resonated with him. "Did you get any of that lava soap I ordered?" Patty asked, and Greg reached under the counter and pulled out a brown bag with 3 bars of the funky orange soap inside. "I gave you the buy 2, get 1 free discount," Greg stage whispered, as he cast a suspicious eye over to the widow. "So generous," Patty said, pretending to blush. "Let me make it up to you after work and take you out for a slice of pizza." "Can't," Greg said somberly. "I'm doing inventory tonight. I'll probably be here till after midnight." Patty looked disappointed, but rebounded quickly. "Some other time, then?" "For sure," Greg said, and Patty paid for her soap and left with a little wave over her shoulder. "I don't know why you keep stringing that girl along, Gregory," Abby said as the door closed behind her. "She's the best thing you're likely to find in a dying town like Eden anyway," setting the barb like she always did. "My mom always said never take anyone to bed from Eden," Gregory said as the widow swept her way around the aisles, "because there was a pretty good chance you were related." "I'm not sure anyone in town would reproduce if they took your mother's maxim to heart," the widow said solemnly, going into the back to do some other sort of busy work. Greg let slip some of the words that his mother or the widow would have swatted him for if they'd been within earshot. He'd been going to Gino's to get his usual BLT and tomato soup, and the chicken noodle soup that the widow loved so much, for the last 2 months, and it had become a part of his daily routine. Miss Abigail had become fond of the soup since taking to her bed, and she didn't seem to complain as much when she had a bowl of it to hand. She'd been sick for about 2 months, and the doctor seemed to think that she might be for the rest of her life. It wasn't cancer or any of those trendy diseases that usually killed people. Nothing so grand as all that. The widow was suffering from regular old pneumonia, and it seemed like it was there to stay. He had come down to Gino's to get their lunch, only to find a closed sign on the door, and the windows dark and uninviting. "They left town last night," said a familiar voice, and Greg jumped as Patty startled him again. "He was just open yesterday," Greg complained. "The least he could have done was told somebody." Patty laughed at that. "Greg, I think you were the only one in town that didn't know that Gino's was closing. He was serving you, me, and your boss, and that was it. Everyone else is either too broke to eat there or already gone." Greg looked around and seemed to notice that Main Street was looking a little emptier than it usually did. There were more empty businesses than open ones these days, something that had started happening about the time the Walmart closed a year and a half ago. People had expected it to breathe new life into the town, but really it just stopped a lot of summer people from coming at all, and led to a lot of the businessmen that had been planning things in Eden to pull up stakes and leave town too. Greg could see people milling about as they went between shops, but they were like heat illusions as they moved listlessly between the few open places and the restaurants. "How many people do you think are left in town?" he asked Patty on a whim. "I'd say less than 5,000. Daryl's talking about closing up the grease pit and moving it to Perkins with his mother." Greg was shocked. He's operated that garage ever since he came back from the Gulf War. Yeah, and most of the guys who came to him to get their cars worked on or their oils changed were in the Gulf War with him, too. Most of them are dead, left town, or the government took their driver's license, and they can't drive anymore. "What will you do?" Greg asked suddenly, a little bit nervously. He was aware that Patty still had romantic intentions for him, and even though he didn't want to date her, he certainly didn't want to lose what was likely his only friend. "You think Abigail would hire me? I hear she's got a real slouch working for her right now." "Ha ha," Greg said sarcastically. "She might, but certainly not for anything you could pay your rent with. She hasn't been doing too well lately. I think..." He looked uneasily back at Gino's before finding the words to properly express what he was thinking. "I think she might be dying, Patty." "You could be so lucky. They say she came over in the wagons when they first settled this place. The Widow Abby is tougher than a boiled owl, and she'll probably outlive all of us." As Greg looked at the empty diner, he certainly hoped so. But in Eden, it often felt like you could shit in one hand and hope in the other, and see which one filled up quicker. "Gregory," the widow said as Greg blundered by on his way to the drugstore, "come in for a minute. We need to talk." Greg sighed as he turned to walk into her bedroom. This sounded like a "hey, I'm firing you" speech waiting to happen. Greg didn't understand how she could. He was her only employee. He basically operated the store by himself. If she fired him, there was no way she could get out of bed and man the shop by herself. She'd been living with the pneumonia for the last 5 months, and every day that dawned with Gregory hearing her watery cough was another day he knew he wouldn't have to call the coroner to come get her. As he pushed the door to her room open, he grabbed one of the masks from beside the door. He wasn't worried about catching anything from her, but what he might pass on to the frail old woman. The whole room smelled of sick, the sweaty aroma of a body too tired to take regular baths, the smell of old food that hadn't been removed, the stench from her bedpan that he would have to take with him when he left, and the wet smell of phlegm that she constantly hacked into a napkin. She breathed heavily, like someone whose lungs are full of lake water, and she smiled sardonically when she saw Greg. "You aren't quite as handsome as the young man I always pictured coming to take care of me after I outlived my husband, but I'm still glad to have you, Gregory." He smiled as he took her hand, holding it gently. "If you're well enough to be sarcastic, then I could really use your help downstairs," he said, enjoying their daily fencing matches. "I'm afraid there won't be anything to open for much longer, son. I just don't have the strength to go down those stairs anymore, and I fear it won't be long before I go to meet my first husband again." She coughed wetly into a napkin as she spoke, and Greg had the good manners not to snatch away his hand. "It sounds an awful lot like you're firing me," Greg said gently. "I suppose I am," she said, "but gently, I hope." "If you're firing me, it might be hard for me to pay you rent, and then I'm not sure how you'd pay the taxes on this place." "That could be difficult," she amended, "but so is coming after a corpse for debt." "How about this?" Greg said. "I'll run the drugstore and manage the accounts so you can keep paying for your medicine if you let me live here and take care of you. Then, when you're gone, you can fire me. How about that?" She laughed, the sound coming out fractured like ice on the cusp of breaking. "You? How could you possibly run the shop and balance the books and order enough product to keep up with the clientele?" "Well, I've been doing a pretty good job for the last 9 months, so I figure I'll just keep doing it until..." He stopped himself from saying it, realizing he'd become fond of the old woman in the time he'd been taking care of her. "Until you get better." She chuckled wetly, sounding like a frog, and looked up at him with her big wet eyes. "You're a good man, Gregory Boyle, no matter what your mother always said about you." "Keep talking like that," he said, rising up as the sun began to cresp the little window, "and I'll make you come downstairs and do some work." "Thanks, come again." The old man smiled toothlessly at Patty as she showed him out. She'd agreed to work at the drugstore after her parents had left their house to her. It's only until they sell it, but they said it was nice to have someone looking after it. Greg had agreed that it sounded pretty cool, but he doubted her parents would ever manage to sell the place. The last realtor had left town 6 months ago, and no one new had bought so much as a cup of dirt from Eden since then. There had been some excitement when a company had purchased the old paper mill, but they had all come in with their trucks and stripped what they could from the factory before leaving. As far as Gregory knew, they had never been back. "You're pretty good at being a checkout girl," Gregory said, grinning as Patty snorted at him. "It's not like it's hard. Most of this stuff sells itself." There was a loud cough from the stairs, and Gregory turned to see Abby making her way slowly down them. She'd been feeling stronger lately, and Gregory had often found her stuck halfway down the stairs. He came to help her, chiding her as she sucked in air soupily. "You're gonna kill yourself like that. You're a little stronger, but don't push it."
"Nonsense," she rasped. "This girl needs proper training. With you to teach her, she'll develop all sorts of bad habits."
"I've got it, Miss Abby. Patty's no slouch. She knows how to do customer service." "It was basically all I did in the automotive department of Walmart," Patty added.
The widow scoffed. "That place wouldn't know customer service if it bit 'em."
But she began to cough more as she elaborated, and Greg had to hold her up as it racked her body. "Come on, let's get you to the rocker out front. You can greet the customers as they come in and maybe get a little sun. I don't want them to think I've got the Halloween decorations out early." She started to protest, but the sun really had done wonders. The doctors had expected her to succumb to her illness months ago, but it was coming up on 2 years, and she was still puttering along. He wrapped her in a blanket and sat her in one of the rocking chairs that dotted the front area. She shivered amidst her layers, the slight breeze reminding Gregory that fall was almost here. He had just gotten her settled when an older woman in a thick shawl approached the shop. "Good morning, Miss Laurie. What brings you here today?" The old woman gave him a wave.
"Just came to get the last of my prescriptions to take to Heavenly View. I'm moving at the end of the week, and they want a list for their physician." "I'll get it for you," Abby rasped, but Greg told her to sit as he went back inside to get the envelope. Losing Miss Laurie to the nursing home would be quite a blow to their business, but Greg had been expecting it. After her husband died, Miss Laurie became a shut-in. She only left the house to see her doctor or fill her prescription, and this was the first time they'd seen her in weeks. As Greg came back with the envelope, he caught the tail end of their conversation. "I'm sure they have room for you, Miss Abby. You could relax with the time you have left and not have to struggle so much. There are people there to help you, and I'm sure Gregory could watch your shop for you." "It sounds awfully nice," Abby said softly, "but I just don't think I can leave Gregory on his own. He depends so much on my wisdom."
Miss Laurie took the envelope, wishing Abby and Gregory the best as she made her way home. The streets were a little less empty today, but the people taking in the sights were nothing but bored locals trying to kill some time. The cars leaving town became fewer and fewer, but that was due in part to the number of residents becoming less and less as well. Greg saw less than a dozen people on a daily basis now, and as the oldsters he'd taken for granted went to either Heavenly View or their heavenly home, their business suffered. Greg watched her go, seeing the potential end of her business as the beginning of the end. Greg flopped onto the rocker in front of the drugstore, his breath coming in deep, grateful lungfuls. All around him, chaos reigned, but its conquest was coming to an end. The fire trucks had taken longer than expected to arrive, Eden's own fire department being little more than 2 volunteers these days. They had both been at home when the fire started, and they had arrived only a little before the trucks from Perkins. It could have been a lot worse. Would have been, in fact, if Greg hadn't smelled the smoke and called for help. As it stood, only 6 buildings had been burned out, their gutted husks looking forlorn in the blinking lights of the fire trucks. Another 4 were damaged, but all 10 had been empty, except for the hardware store. Greg could see Gabriel sobbing quietly on the porch of his father's legacy, the rustic old shop now a burnt cinder that would never rise again. Greg wanted to go to him, especially after all the work he'd done to keep the rest of Main Street from burning, but he was too bone-weary to do much else but sit and be glad that he wasn't crying over a burnt husk too. It had all started at the old ice cream parlor. The building had been abandoned for years, closing up shop right around the same time the Walmart had. That had given the rats that now occupied the space plenty of time to chew on the wires and ruin the electrical box. Greg couldn't prove that that's what had started the fire, but when the smoke woke him up, the peeling white exterior was in full blaze. He'd called the fire department and been redirected to the station in Perkins. As he came out onto the porch, Gabriel was already using one of the big wrenches to pry open the fire hydrant. "Help me!" he gasped through gritted teeth, and as Greg took hold of the wrench, the two had water shooting out in no time. They had just managed to smother the worst of the fire at the parlor when the empty store beside it blazed to life. The next hour became a series of tossing water onto smoldering buildings, only to see the one next to it go up in flames. The old buildings were just so dry, and the summer had been a hot one. The wooden storefronts were little more than kindling to the hungry flames, and even some of the brick fronts began to smoke as their windows shattered from the heat. The trucks showed up, after the two men had been joined by a pair from the gas station down the road, Greg having played firefighter for half an hour by that point. The firefighters looked miffed that the two had opened a hydrant, but they hooked up anyway, and seemed better equipped at dousing the remains of their once beautiful Main Street. As the trucks rolled away, Greg squinted at the first light of dawn as it crested the broken pavement. He staggered inside, reaching to turn the sign around before realizing the futility. There would be no business today, not with all the smoldering buildings on the street. "Abby, I don't think we're opening up shop today. I'm bone weary, and debris is going to make it impossible to get up the street." He expected her to rasp at him. She was always up early, but he heard nothing. He moved closer to the door, knocking on it, but he still received no answer. He knocked again before pushing inside, seeing her buried beneath her blankets like a small bear. She looked so peaceful, her usual ragged breathing sounding much better today. She usually coughed every fourth breath, but he hadn't heard her cough at all since he'd come in. "Come on, don't be mad. It's been a really long night, and I'm dog-tired. There's no way anyone's going to—" As he got close, he noticed that her breathing wasn't clearer like he'd thought. He'd been so tired that he'd overlooked her lack of coughing and wheezing, thinking she might have finally gotten better. It seemed he was right, as was her doctor. He had said that she would keep the pneumonia for the rest of her life. It appeared that now she was cured of it. She neither wheezed nor rasped, coughed or railed. She lay as peaceful as she had when she was a girl. Her breathing wasn't clearer because she was better. Her breathing was clearer because she wasn't breathing. Greg didn't sleep at all that day, and the trucks from Perry had barely passed the county line when he called for an ambulance he knew would arrive much too late. There were only 10 attendees at Abby Worth's funeral. Greg, Patty, and Mayor Daniel were the only 3 from town, the rest being friends from outside Eden. Abby had a simple service. Her plot in Mount Pleasant was arranged the same year her husband had died. She was laid to rest beside him, and when the mayor agreed to follow Greg and Patty back to the apartment, they were flattered to have him join them for dinner. "You know, she left it all to you," the mayor said, making appreciative noises as he ate the meatloaf Patty had made. Greg almost choked as he looked at the man. "How do you know that?" "I'm the only notary and lawyer in town. She came to me after she got sick and told me she was leaving it all to you. She didn't have any other family. Did you know that? Nomad, I guess. You and Patty here are 2 of about 90 residents left in Eden." That took Greg by surprise. How are there so few? Fire last week made the remaining businesses on Main Street rethink staying. They see the unoccupied buildings as a liability. Most of them sold their shops and moved to Perry or DeCroix. The outliers will be gone at the end of the year. None of them have signed leases for the next year, and by January this place may be the only business in town. The 3 sat eating in silence for a few minutes, letting it all sink in. It seemed that Eden, too, was gasping out its last. "I figure the Jim brothers at Jim Petrol will sign up for another year, but I doubt I'll be here to see them close up shop next year. My term ends in May, and whether nepotism elects me mayor again or not, I'm leaving for Montana. My mother's properties sat empty for too many years, and I think I might be ready to retire to the mountains." He excused himself after that, thanking Patty for the meatloaf as he left the two of them in the little apartment. The two ate in silence, their grief palpable as they quietly mourned a woman they had both grown close to. "Did I tell you?" Patty finally said, looking up from her laborious task of herding her green beans into a corner. "Someone finally bought Mom and Dad's old house." "Oh?" Greg asked, his mind trying to punch through the film of grief to realize what this meant. Who's the lucky owner?" "State Road Department," she said, managing a small, painful smile. "They bought most of the houses in that area. They're starting work on a highway project that will cut the time from Washington to California by hours. It's bad news for Perry. It'll cut a lot of the little roads out of the equation and give them a straight shot to the coast." What she didn't say was this would also be a huge detriment to Eden, but that hardly seemed to matter. Where will you go?" Greg asked, his food forgotten at the prospect of being one less in a town of ghosts. "I don't know," she said. She was standing at the sink, and Greg could see her in profile. She looked lovely in mourning, a woman that any man would have been lucky to have the love of. She was dependable, she was hard-working, she was kind, and, worst of all, she seemed to put her own happiness aside for Greg. He knew she would give him that love, that she would stay with him in this tiny apartment if he asked her to, but he also knew that it would be selfish to ask. In the movies, Greg would ask her to stay, and they would embrace and kiss, and soon their children would be running through the streets as they watched happily from rockers on the front porch. She seemed to be waiting for just that, but Greg couldn't give it to her. She deserved more than Greg's empty companionship. Patty deserved something more than Greg's fumbling platonic feelings. She told him good night a few minutes later, taking her Pyrex dish and leaving through the familiar stairs. Even in his grief, now elevated by the loss of his friend, Greg wasn't blind to the sobs she tried to muffle. Greg came awake like a hibernating bear, the loud banging on the door enough to wake the dead. Someone was really walloping it, too, slamming their fist against it hard enough to rattle the glass, and Greg came tentatively out of bed. He was wearing only a shirt and jockey shorts, his mid-30s belly hanging over the waistband as he crept from the bedroom and into the living room. He reached for the fire poker as he came, afraid that the empty town might have attracted teenagers bent on helling. They would have seen the lights in the bathroom upstairs and decided to shake the cages a little, and Greg wished he'd thought to grab his shotgun before leaving the bedroom. He came down the stairs in a slow, jerky walk, the pounding not stopping in the least bit. Whoever it was calling his name, too, which was a little off-putting. Greg couldn't imagine anyone he knew in this town being out so late, and banging on his door, but he quickened his pace a little, fearing someone was in trouble. Maybe Patty was hurt, maybe there'd been another fire, maybe it was something even worse. He'd been right about that, it seemed, and as the door came open, he found Patty leaning against the frame, grinning at him drunkenly. "There you are, Gregory," she trumpeted, stumbling into him as she slurred an apology. "Are you all right?" Greg asked, trying not to draw attention to her current state, but finding it very difficult. "Right with Eversharp," she said, her hands wrapping around him as she tried to pull him into her arms. "What's gotten into you, Patty?" Greg asked, though it was pretty clear what had gotten into her. As if in response, Patty pressed her lips against his, silencing his upcoming protests. Her tongue was warm and wet as it tried to invade his mouth, and Greg struggled as he tried to push her away. His skin was covered in goosebumps, and he was shuddering as she leaned closer to him. He could taste the alcohol on her breath, and it was making him gag. He didn't know what she'd been drinking, but it was stronger than anything he was familiar with. When she finally pulled away from him, her eyes were streaming tears, and they looked hurt and confused. "Why won't you kiss me back?" she wailed, as she stumbled backwards and bumped into the doorframe. I Greg searched for the words, but he just couldn't find them. I just don't think of you that way, he finally blurted out. She sobbed, her eyes gushing as she looked at him blearily. She was drunk and confused, and clearly this had made more sense before she'd come to his home in the middle of the night. Now her hopes were falling to pieces, and she was left with nothing but the understanding that she was alone. He'd been honest with her, but that had hardly cut the sting. "Why won't you love me?" she bawled, her eyes accusatory, even as they gushed tears. "I stayed in this corpse of a town for you, Greg. I worked at a place that barely paid for my groceries, and lied to my parents when they wanted nothing but to send me back to college. And for what? I love you, Greg. I've loved you since we were kids. Why won't you love me back?" When he gripped her shoulder, it sobered her a little, and he saw the embarrassment starting to creep into her eyes. "I do love you, Patty. I love you too much to let you settle for someone who doesn't love you the same way you love them. You deserve someone who will love you as deeply as you love me, and I can't do that. Go. Let your parents send you to college. Live the life you deserve. Find someone who will care for you the way you care for me." It was morning before she sobered up enough to leave, and the two had a long talk. Patty cried a lot, Greg finding his eyes too dry for tears. She didn't sway as she left, the alcohol having been burned away by her despair. Greg watched her go, and went to bed as the sun filled the apartment with light. Tomorrow would be Sunday, the only day Abby let them close the store. He'd take tomorrow to mourn, and then open the store on Monday. It seemed appropriate somehow to take a day for himself before getting back to the only thing he was good at. Greg sat on the front porch of Abby's drugs, the snow coming down as it coated the cracked and pitted streets of Eden. It had been 20 years since the widow Abby Worth had passed, and he was still living in Eden, if you could call it living. His hair was now the silver of falling snow, his eyes not as good as they had been, and his legs shook a little when he walked. That didn't stop him from tending the garden that he'd begun growing on 5th Street, or the other on 6th Street, that had borne corn every year since Patty had left. He had a letter from her somewhere upstairs, in the drawer where he kept his prized possessions. She had sent a few others, a wedding invitation, a birth announcement, and a few Christmas cards, but he hadn't received anything from her in 4 years. She would be old too now, and Greg wondered if she might have died. He coughed as he watched the snow, bending double into the rocker as he spat phlegm into it. It sounded as bad as the widow's had, and he didn't need a doctor to tell him that he was dying. It had started as a cough, just a dry thing that was better some days than others, but it had grown wet and rough, and now his breathing was soupy and worrisome. He supposed it would probably kill him, and he found that the idea didn't bother him all that much. He could feel the cold weight of the gold key he wore around his neck, and he smiled as he thought of the day Mayor Daniel had come to say goodbye. He had lasted longer in the town than he'd thought, outlasting the Jim brothers by a whole month. Their contract with Exxon had been canceled when they couldn't pay their gas bill, and without the gas, they had packed up shop and headed to parts unknown. By then, there had been about 60 people on the outskirts, and no one in the town proper. Days would go by between people sightings, but there were still a few who came to the drugstore. It wasn't until the outlying farms and lands began being annexed by the surrounding towns that Mayor Daniels had decided to leave. Greg had looked up when the bell rang and nodded when he saw Daniels walk in. "Something ailing you, Mayor?" he asked, but the graying man had shaken his head. "Not the mayor any more. I'm heading out, I think. I'm not sure where, but I think Eden is all but played out." He tossed the key to Greg then, the one that would open most any door or any building or storefront that was still good. The mayor's office, the sheriff's office, anything else the town deemed the mayor worthy of guarding. "Guess now you're the mayor, the last mayor of Eden. Wear the title with pride. If you leave, be sure to pass the key to whoever's still here." Greg had never gotten a letter from him, but the key had come in handy when it came to planting and keeping the power on. It also got him a small stipend from the state, which he used to keep the lights on Main Street burning, and some food in his fridge to keep him from starving. Greg hadn't seen anyone wander through Eden in years, save for a few cars that got lost on their way somewhere else. Sometimes ghost hunters or the curious came to visit, and Greg told them what town history he remembered as he tried to ignore their petty theft. They never took much. Anything worth anything was locked away behind one of those doors that his key opened. He supposed they would have it after he was gone, if they didn't mind a little grave robbing or corpse rifling. He coughed then, and when he took his hand away, his palms had red on them. As he looked down Main Street, he could see the collapsed remains of the old Walmart as it hunkered like a tired dog. He remembered standing outside it as he watched the trucks roll away, and it seemed like 1,000,000 years had passed since then. People called Eden a ghost town, and they weren't wrong. As Greg looked up and down the street, he imagined all the ghosts who must reside here. He watched a gaggle of old ladies wandering up the road towards the Baptist church that had burned to the ground 3 years ago during a lightning storm. He saw some school kids laughing up the road as they headed for the ice cream parlor that had started the fire all those years ago. He saw 4th of July parades, Christmas tree lightings in the square, summer days that ended with the sound of cicadas, scarecrow contests that the mayor had presided over dutifully. Greg thought he saw Patty and Abby waiting for him, and as the rise and fall of his chest slowed, he wondered if he might love her in the hereafter, as he never could in life. As he watched the snow come down around him, and the swish of his chair became slower and slower, he supposed he would find out.
One more story for you, and I think we've got a pretty good one to go out on. It's another peaceful place to visit, a place that many never get to leave, a cemetery, but a very different cemetery, a cemetery with headstones that grow to the sky and last a lifetime. So let's take a visit to Whispering Pines.
It is my pleasure to unveil an innovation in burial services. The investors looked uncomfortable as they sat in the hot sun on the edge of John's latest investment. When the tech mogul had bought 500 acres of swampland, people had speculated that he meant to build another factory for his microchips. Tech magazines had floated the idea of everything from warehouses to a new robotics division and everything in between, but none of them could have guessed his true intentions. His stock price had doubled since the announcement, and investors seemed to be holding their breath to see what would come out of Yomite Solutions this season. Only his accountant had known the real story, and he had been sworn to secrecy. Not a word to anyone, John said, winking as his usual smile spread across his face. Wayne had snorted. John, no one would believe me if I told them. Now here they were, their eyebrows raised as he talked about not some new piece of tech, but an innovation in the burial of all things. Behind me stands 500 acres of new growth, trees ready to provide mankind with oxygen, and many helpful species of insects and wildlife will find a place to live here. Beneath them, however, are the first in a long line of subjects in our land renewal innovation. The bodies are infused with seeds. The seeds take root and use them for nourishment, and as such, become a sort of casket for the dead. He saw some of the squirming looks held by those gathered, and decided to squash them. Behind me stands what will one day be a new forest, a forest that will be untouchable thanks to the laws now in place. Think of it, every cemetery a forest, every boneyard a park, every place of death a place of rebirth. This is the future, a future that bodes well for the earth and for the health of our planet. Welcome to Yomite Pines Memorial Forest, a place of eternal rest and peace. The investors clapped. It wasn't over-enthusiastic, but they clapped. They would see, in time, that it was a good middle ground. John had done a lot of harm to this planet with his factories, his smog, and his landfills full of obsolete electronics. If he could turn people's minds and grow a memorial forest in every state, it would go a long way towards making him feel better about the business and his soul. John Yo might, in fact, hope to be buried in one of these forests himself one day. He had no way of knowing how soon that dream might become a reality. That was the first night that he had the dream. He was running through the rows of newly planted pines, the ground groaning as they grew towards the heavens. They towered over him, their branches grasping for the sky, and as they blotted out the moon, he heard their whispers, "Join us, join us, join us in the soil." The ground sucked at his feet as he ran. The sand clung to him as if trying to hold him down, and as he jogged through the park that he had created, a cold wind blew amongst the trees. He woke up in his bed as the whispers grew, and breathed a sigh of relief when he realized it had all been a dream. Did the water in his morning shower look a little darker as it went down the drain? Were there leaves in the pocket of his sleeping shorts? Was there maybe even some mud he overlooked on his arms and legs? Maybe, but if there were, John didn't see them. He shook it off his nerves as he got ready for the day, but it wouldn't be the last time he ran through the trees by night. Wow, John, if you'd told me this thing would take off like this a year ago, I would have called you crazy. John looked down over the forest of pines and oaks, their tops coming in as they grew strong. The glass window over his tower made the perfect observation platform, and the glass was thick enough to block out the whispers he sometimes heard when he walked the grounds. Wayne was going over the numbers, but John was barely listening. "You did call me crazy," John said, looking down over his forest of trees. He had built this tower so he could watch the forest grow, and he found he was truly at peace when he stood up here. Watching them sway, watching them grow, it was all so different from anything he had done before. "Did I?" Wayne said. "I guess I was wrong. This has been a bigger windfall than any of your previous endeavors." John would have agreed if it hadn't been for the incidences that kept cropping up. Who would have thought that people would pay so much to save the planet and to be one with the burgeoning forest? John asked. "Now, if we could just figure out why people keep going missing, we'd be set," Wayne retorted. He said it with a laugh, but John really didn't find it funny. If it had been one or two, John could have understood, but what kind of memorial garden loses double-digit guests in their first year? The large forest had become a popular tourist spot, and people had come to camp and walk and take in the natural beauty of the new-growth forest. The trees were only about half the size that they would grow to be, but they were still an impressive stature. They were the living embodiment of those who had nourished them. At least that's what the papers and some of the journals were saying. There were plans to grow more of them if participation was good, and so far it had been. People were interested in helping the environment and having a quiet and beautiful place for their relatives to visit them. And the list of people who had bought places in Yomite Pines would facilitate the buying of another 20 or 30 acres at least. It had all been looking so promising before people started going missing. At first, it wasn't anything to get excited about. A couple of campers never arrived back home. An older couple that never returned to their car after a visit. A man who never walked back out the front gate after walking in. These things were odd, but not unexplainable. People did all kinds of silly things, and this was no more than someone who simply decided to leave by another way, or had forgotten to check out, or perhaps decided to lose themselves on purpose and find a quiet place to die. The kid, however, the kid was something else. Marcus Lorraine was 6 and had accompanied his parents into the little forest so he could visit his grandmother. They had walked amongst the trees, taken in the paths and little bridges and the shallow river that ran through it, but when they had turned to go, Miss Lorraine had noticed that her son was nowhere to be found. She swore he had been with them when they crossed the little bridge over the river. She swore he had been with them when they stopped to dip their toes into the water. She swore he had been with them when they stopped at the bathrooms. She also swore that she couldn't be certain after they had passed the picnic area and started heading back to their car. I don't remember much after the picnic area, if I'm being honest, she said, her dreamy voice at odds with her tearful demeanor of a moment before. I'd been walking along, listening to something, and for a moment it was almost like I was hearing my mom talk to me. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you that I could almost hear her voice. Her husband had said something similar, though not quite the same. He could swear he heard people whispering just out of sight, like they were sitting in the woods and discussing important matters. He described it like the scene in The Hobbit, where the dwarves keep interrupting the elves' party. He could hear them, but he knew that if he went to investigate, they would all just melt away and reappear somewhere else. Regardless, neither of them could say when little Marcus had left their side, but he was gone now, and they wanted him found. John stayed with the parents while the forest was searched. He had set up a little command center near the visitor center and was directing volunteers from there. Mr. Lorraine had gone out to help them at the start, but by sunset, he was back at the tent and sitting with his wife. The two were holding each other, both praying quietly as they waited for their son to return. They were upset, but John had yet to see them cry. They were afraid, but they didn't look overly fearful. He would have thought they'd be in shock, except that they kept looking into the forest as if someone were calling to them before going back to their prayers. "This isn't good," John said under his breath. "You don't say," Wayne had said, looking at the parents as he pitched his voice low. "Be as glib as you want, but Marcus Lorraine's disappearance doesn't look good." Wayne pulled him aside out of earshot of the grieving parents so that they could talk. "Do you have any idea how many kids go missing in the national park every year? Do you know how many theme parks lose kids without the help of creeps? Kids wander off, John. Probably find him asleep under a tree somewhere." They did not find him asleep under a tree somewhere. They didn't find him at all, as it happened. Marcus was the 15th person to go missing in the park that year, but he wasn't the last. "We've had hundreds more pre-orders for the upcoming acreage. We'll sell the plots as quickly as they become available. It's almost like we're printing money." John was glad that Wayne had forgotten about the kid so easily, but John found it a little more difficult. He remembered each of the names, each a civil suit their families tried to file before his lawyers shut them down, and he supposed he probably always would. Wayne went on talking, but John couldn't take his eyes off the trees. Their sway was so hypnotic. Maybe this was why people kept going missing. That, or the whispering that he heard sometimes. He could even hear it a little up here, but it was always worse when he was on the grounds. It was like a slithering little voice that wormed its way into his ears, begging him to come and join the others who had already come to this place. And why not, he thought. They all seemed to have found peace here. Everyone seemed to find peace here. Maybe that was why so many of them came here too. "How's your mom?" Wayne asked suddenly, and the question jarred him back to reality. "Some days better, some days worse. She's fading, but she's going out slowly." "Will you plant her here too when the time comes?" Wayne asked, the question sounding uneasy. "I've saved her a spot from the very start," John said, looking at a place near the base of the tower. "I grew this forest for her, after all. Wayne excused himself after a little more small talk, but John stood there and watched the trees sway. Who wouldn't want to be laid to rest in such a peaceful place? It's an honor to stand here and ring in a year since the opening of Yomite Pines Memorial Forest. The crowd applauded excitedly, but as John stood looking out over them, all he could hear was the wind through the trees beyond them. They were all pines here at Yomite Pines, somehow or another. Mighty pines that grew lush and deep green in the hardy soil. In about a year, they had grown past the projections put forth at the start, and John now stood beneath towering trees that had been little more than half-grown saplings 2 years ago when he'd begun planting. He shuddered a little as something else rustled against his subconscious, but he put it aside, like he always did. It was just nerves, after all, just like the dreams. I'm proud to say we've incorporated another 100 acres, 50 of which has been donated by the North American Wildlife Foundation to help with the deforestation efforts. Of those new 100 acres, we have already filled 50 of them with fresh growth and new remains. The Yomite Pines Memorial Forest will soon be a forest stretching across the newly reclaimed land, and our world will be better for it. The applause from the crowd was much more enthusiastic than they had been last time. The thought of a forest of dead people had been a little sickening, a little spooky too, but now they were behind him. This reforestation project was a big hit, and people were signing up for plots in the hundreds. Though Yomite Pines might be a big hit with the people, John was beginning to have reservations about the project. It had been 6 months since Marcus had disappeared, and now his mother and father were also missing. John had once liked to stroll out here, just taking it all in and soaking in the peaceful landscape he had created. He had been on one such walk about 2 weeks after Marcus had gone missing, when he had seen Mrs. Lorraine walking down the path towards him. Walking might have been a stretch. Shelley Lorraine was wobbling like a drunk, and as she came towards him, she looked as if she were barely in the world. He called out to her, asking how she was doing and if there was any news on Marcus, but it took 3 such calls for her to look up and acknowledge him. "Huh?" she finally said, shaking her head as if she'd been sleepwalking. "Oh, Mr. Yomite, She seemed to mumble through what she was before answering. "As well as I can be, I suppose." "Did you come to look for Marcus?" he asked, wondering why she was here if she was still looking for her son. The whole park had been searched from border to border, but no sign of the kid had been found. It was as if the ground had simply swallowed him up and left nothing behind. They had moved on to the surrounding scrublands, but John was certain that he had seen the mother in the park more than once. The father had come in once as well, but that was the last time that John had seen him. He hadn't come back out again after that, and John supposed he was doing better than his wife. Here she was, high or drunk or both, and John would have to tell security to keep an eye on her. "Yes," she said, looking off into the trees as if someone had called her. "Yes, it's like I can hear him when I'm here. He keeps calling for me, and I keep hoping I'll find him. Excuse me," she said, and stepped into the tree line as she went off into the towering gravestones that surrounded them. That was the last time that John had seen her. The last time that anyone had seen her, actually. The whole family had disappeared, and Scott, the security guy over the park, actually showed him the security footage of Mr. Lorraine coming in but never leaving. He asked John what he wanted to do with it, and John had told him not to tell anybody about it. He must have left in a crowd, and we missed him. There's no reason to tell anyone about this. It was a tragedy, after all, but as guilty as John felt, he couldn't have something like this sabotaged by one family. This was his chance to make amends for some of the things he had done, to make amends to the one person whose opinion mattered to him. That was the last anyone spoke of the Lorraines, but it wasn't the last John thought of them. The new acreage will be open to the public next year, once the new growth has had time to get its roots. Until then, I invite all of you to enjoy Yo-Mart Park in its fullest." They applauded again, disappearing as John waved his way off stage. Wayne was waiting for him off stage too, all smiles. Maybe it was because he was an accountant, but as long as the money flowed, Wayne was happy. "Great speech," he said, walking beside John as the two made their way towards the tower. John watched as many of the people seated there took up walking through the park, looking in awe at the trees that had been grown from human compost. "We shouldn't be letting people just walk around the park anymore," John said suddenly. "It's too dangerous." Wayne looked confused, but as John finished, he grinned like a shot fox. "How else do you intend to pay for park services and expansion?" he said, smiling woodenly. Maybe it shouldn't be expanded. It shouldn't be open to the public either. No one picnics in a graveyard. No one goes bird-watching at the cemetery. The longer we let them walk the paths of Yo-Mite Pines, the more of them will go missing. We're up to 20 this year, and it's probably more like twice that number. Something's happening here. You're too money-hungry to see it," John said, now real emotion in his voice. Wayne looked like he wanted to say something cutting, but he contented himself with a lame, says the billionaire tech mogul. John rounded on him. "This has nothing to do with money, nothing to do with fame or glory either. I've spent years killing this planet with my selfish ventures, and now it's time to give back. The planet deserves a chance to heal, and I intend to give it that. Yo-Mite Pines will sweep as far as I can push it, an untouchable beauty that will heal the world. But there's no reason that people should be free to wander here." The door to his car was open, and he climbed in as he gave Wayne one final withering look. "I want to close the grounds by the start of next month. I don't care what it costs. Make it happen." Wayne watched him go, and he sighed as he watched him get smaller in the rearview mirror. John felt more at ease as he drove off. The incessant whispering was finally cut off, and that was good because it was getting to be more than he could take. Every time he came out to the pines, it got worse, but John still found himself drawn to the place. John dreamed about it most every night, and sometimes he woke up with dirty feet or muddy shoes at the foot of his bed. John didn't live too far from the park, but it was still 5 miles or more. Was he walking there in the middle of the night? Surely he wasn't driving, but what other option could there be? In his dreams, he walked amongst the trees, hearing the voices on the wind. In his dreams, he saw people walking amongst those trees, people who were as thin as fruit skins. They wanted him to join them, to come and be a part of them, and John found it harder and harder to ignore their call the longer it went on. He knew that one day he'd have to go to them, but until then, he still had work to do. This was a gift to his mother, after all, the woman who had been so disappointed with his actions, but had never stopped loving him. This was a final gift to her before she left the world forever. This was the last thing that he could do to make amends. The valet parked his car as he pulled up to the hospital, and as he rode the elevator up to the 7th floor, he wondered what state he would find her in today. She'd been getting weaker as the cancer ate at her, and it seemed unfair that it should be something like that would take his mother from the world. She, who had marched against deforestation, who had gone to sit-ins for cleaner oceans and for endangered species, the woman who had loved the earth with all that she had, was going to be taken from it by something as mundane as cancer. His mother was going to be eaten alive by something that none of his money could do anything about, and John hated that more than anything. He came in to find her napping, but she opened her eyes as he took her hand and smiled at him. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" he asked, trying not to cry, but knowing that his eyes were leaking. "Like I'm dying," she said, smiling despite herself. "Just not fast enough for the cancer's liking. We added another 100 acres to the park today. The ceremony was great. I wish you could have been there." "Me too," she said, her eyes drooping. She was so tired these days, so easily tapped out. Mom, am I doing the right thing here? I know this is helping the environment, helping the world, but is it the right thing? His mother smiled, her face sad but content. I can't tell you that, dear. We all have to decide what's right and wrong for ourselves. I only want to do what would make you proud of me, what would make you proud to have me as a son. John was crying, really having a good boo-hoo, but he didn't care who saw it as he pressed his face against her shoulder. Well, she said, laughing hoarsely, then I'm glad my pain could be useful for something. He just sat there with her, the two of them enjoying the other's company. John had saved her a place for after she was gone, a place where she could be at peace within the earth. Her final good deed for the planet she loved so much. She would grow within the heart of the park, likely the largest tree in the park when she was done. She would rise above all the others, dwarfing all the pines as she rose for the sky. Till then, however, he would mourn her, one day at a time. He was running, the soil mashing between his toes as he went. The trees rose up around him, their voices high and beautiful. They called to him as he ran, asking why he was fleeing from them. They could bring him peace, too. They could make him complete within the soil. The moon was a ghostly sickle over top of him, and as he ran over the muddy ground of the park, his park, he felt more and more lost. He had built this place, had designed the layout, and it was unthinkable that he should be unable to find his way. This was a dream, anyway, he told himself. He was dreaming all this, no matter how much dirt he found on his sheets in the morning. These were all just nightmares, regardless of the filth he found at the bottom of his feet. Nothing here could hurt him, nothing could really get him, but that did little to hamper his fear as he ran. Come to us, John. Come find peace in the soil. His spine prickled. Had that been Miss Lorraine? He took turns at random, his feet feeling heavy the further he went into the park as it sucked at him. The ground was hungry, and now it wanted him to go along with the others it had taken. He didn't understand how it could still be hungry, but it ate greedily as he sank more and more of them into the soil. Now it wanted him too, and as his feet came onto the sidewalk, he breathed a sigh of relief. The ground couldn't get him on the sidewalk. At least he didn't think so. He seemed to come back to himself as that thought came to him, and he realized this may not be a dream. Suddenly he was standing on the sidewalk, wearing his comfortable sleep pants and his sleeveless t-shirt, staring at the whispering sea of trees. He'd found himself here before, wondering how he had gotten here, and as he reached for his phone, he realized it wasn't in his pocket. It wouldn't be, would it? It'd be on his nightstand, right where he'd left it. He looked at the tower and was thankful that he'd paid for night security. He started walking towards the edifice, preparing to answer some questions yet again. This is starting to become a problem, John. Wayne was pacing around his office in the tower as John sat drinking coffee in his night clothes. Scott had called Wayne for some reason, and John would have to have a word with him about that later. John signed the paychecks around here, not his accountant and VP of sales. Scott was likely worried that John was having a break from reality. John realized that didn't change matters, though. This was still John's project, and he was in charge. If the shareholders find out about this is going to be bad. John laughed. Shareholders? What shareholders? This project is being bankrolled by me and me alone. Wayne shook his head. I'm not talking about the park, John. I'm talking about the shareholders in your other companies. If they find out that you're wandering around your memorial garden every night, they might worry that you're losing it. John shrugged. Let them think what they want. This is more important than anything else. Wayne looked at him then like he might be crazy. Talk like that's going to bankrupt you. I know you're torn up about your mother, John, but this isn't the time to give up. John didn't say anything for a little while, staring at the coffee as it sloshed in his cup. I I don't know if I want to add more acreage to this place. I don't know if I want people here or not. The only thing I do know is that this work is important to the planet, if not the people, and it needs to continue. Wayne left not long after that, and John was left to stare into his cup and wonder. Despite what he had told Wayne, he added another 100 acres to the park. Despite what he had told Wayne, the people still came to the park. They had a man-made lake now, 3 picnic areas, and enough parking for everyone buried here and then some. They also added nearly 30 missing patrons to the tally, putting them at around 60. There had been many searches of the grounds, but no one had ever been found. It had become quite a mystery, and as John drove into the park, he grimaced at the graffiti on the welcome sign. People kept spray painting "Whispering" over Yomite on the sign, and John had replaced it several times already. He'd have to get Scott to check the cameras again, though he found the name extremely appropriate. John's dreams had far from abated, and he rolled his window up as the whispering tried to find its way to him again. They beseeched him to come to them, to join them, and John didn't know how long he could resist them. The dreams were drawing him out here nightly, and he'd started waking up in the park more often than not. It was becoming more and more apparent that he was simply walking here at night, and there didn't seem to be any way to stop that from happening. Lately, however, the calls had been in a voice that he couldn't refuse. He walked into the park, sliding in his AirPods as he came through the gate, and the whispering intensified. It really was a beautiful place. The pines had come in nicely, and they were growing tall and healthy. They stretched out from the gate now, a mighty forest that had risen from nothing, and he was proud of his work. He was haunted by that work, too, but it didn't stop him from being proud of it. He had accomplished much in the 2 years since starting, but there was still so much work left to do. He stopped by one of the trees, the one near the base of the tower, and looked down at the new growth already poking its way through the soil. "Hey, Mom. Looking good," he whispered. She had passed about 3 months ago, not long after his conversation in her hospital room. She had been laid to rest in the park, his last gift to her, and the placard he had put up in front of her tree was the only real allocation for grave markers. Everyone else had a small number so their loved ones could find them, but his mother would only be important to him, and he knew that. She had been his last family, the only surviving piece, and now it was down to him to mourn her. When she had joined his dreams, adding her voice to the chorus, he didn't know how much longer he'd be able to hold out. Wayne was waiting for him when he got to the top of the tower, holding up the plans for the latest expansion. "We just got approval for another 100 acres. We should have it filled before June, and then the next 100 before this time next year, I guess. How much would it take to get another 1,000 acres? Wayne's eyes went a little wild. I mean, some of it would be available through government grants, but the cost would be steep. Make it happen. I don't care what it costs." Wayne looked at him oddly. "You feeling okay? You're not planning on doing anything drastic, are you?" He seemed to have noticed how close John was standing to the window. John couldn't exactly blame him for his concern. John had been feeling a little hinky, as his mom had been wont to say, and he wasn't sure what to do about it, or what he might do about it. "I'll get the papers drawn up," Wayne said, rolling up the survey charts. I talked with Scott about the sign, too. As usual, they can't find anything on the cameras to blame it on. Just kids out for a little helling, I guess." John nodded, but it was pretty clear that Wayne couldn't hear the whispers. He didn't get it. Probably never would. He was the perfect one to run something like this, though he would never understand the importance of it, or the horror. The nights John had spent out here had shown him where the missing people were going, had shown him his own fate as well. The whispering would get him one of these nights. It was only a matter of time. John was tired, but the terror made his legs move as the mud sucked at his every step. Maybe tonight was the night. Maybe this would be the night they got him. Maybe this was the night he became a part of Whispering Pines. Even the name had slunk into his consciousness. It was fitting, too fitting, and he could no more outrun it than he could the ground that sucked at his feet. Suddenly the ground did a little more than pull, and John was up to his thighs in the hungry muck. Beneath the soil he could feel the strong grip of searching vines and realized that if he didn't start fighting now, the jig would be up. He yanked and tugged, his strong runner's legs feeling ineffective in the muck. He was losing ground, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and when the paved path came into view, he waited like a drowning man. The roots gripped at him, dragging him back, but John pulled onward, working for the shore. Suddenly, the dirt was up to his hips, and he was wading through the fresh mud. He wasn't going to make it, he thought. The roots would get him, the ground would take him, and he'd be with the dead. One of his nails tore up painfully as he grasped the sidewalk, but he pulled himself up nonetheless. He limped a little as he walked towards the tower, one of his ankles having twisted a little as the root grabbed at him. John's steps weren't just heavy because of the ankle, though. John hadn't gotten a good night's sleep since he opened this damn place. He was exhausted, living off cat naps in his office, or the 4 or 5 hours he snatched a night. John was used to weird sleep schedules, and he had kept strange hours throughout college, but as he got older, it became harder to maintain. He didn't know how much longer he could last like this, and as he came to a familiar placard, he stopped in front of it. His mother's tree was larger than it had any right to be. Seemed larger than it had been this morning, in fact, and the concrete bit at his knees as he dropped down before it. "Mom," he said, tears running down his face. "Mom, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm so tired. I want to rest. I want to..." When his mother's voice shuddered against him, like the caress of a bird's wing, he looked up and saw her. She was lovely, bedecked in leaves and green, the queen of summer in all her glory. When she reached down to touch his face, her hands felt like flowers against his skin. He closed his eyes as he leaned into her touch, her words like summer sun on his skin. "You've done your best, John. Come, rest with us." John nodded, pitching forward as the earth swallowed him up. He should have been terrified, but the embrace felt almost womb-like. It felt so natural, like coming home, and John breathed in a lungful of soil as the darkness enveloped him. "Welcome home," his mother said, and John felt at home. It's my tremendous pleasure to announce the expansion of Whispering Pines Memorial Forest. The park has become less of a memorial and more of a forest in its own right now, and I hope someday to see hundreds of forests like it, instead of useless granite slabs that do nothing but take up space. I know if my friend, John Yomite, or his mother, Tera Yomite, could see how this project had expanded, they would be very proud of the work we've achieved here. I've watched this garden grow into a mighty forest, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it. John watched as Wayne spoke to the crowd, telling them about the new backer who was interested in what they were doing here. John understood the words he said, things like the woman's name, Titania Thurston, the Green Society, and Kashmir Botanical Gardens, but they didn't mean anything to him. If someone was interested in his idea, that was good. If they let the forest rot, he supposed that was okay too. John was part of the Whispering Pines woods now, and he supposed that others would be too, very soon. Being a tree was probably the best thing he'd ever experienced, and he was eager to share it with others. Wayne still couldn't hear him, but he would, someday. Some of those in the crowd could clearly hear him, and they'd likely join him too, someday. John had time, after all. He certainly wasn't going anywhere.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back again very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.